This video is an introduction to the Euclid Data Explorer, a tool that's at IRSA. This is part of the Euclid tutorials from June 2026. From the main IRSA page, if you go to the Euclid button, you're taken to the Euclid mission page. There's a lot of good information on here, including documentation from the most current release, but I'm going to click on Euclid Data Explorer. It loads the tool. From the beginning, you're dropped into a Results tab here. There are many other tabs here that do different things. Here, if we go to the Images tab, it loads an all-sky view in the background. The background right now happens to be a DSS color image. And then in the foreground, it has two different things overlaid. The yellow is the Euclid planned coverage, and the red is the Euclid data that have been released. You can see that there are footprints here and a little footprint there. You can grab and drag this image. You can zoom in. As you zoom in, those footprints become more and more transparent so that when you go in all the way, you can see straight through it to the image that's in the background. If you want to jump back out, you can do center galactic, zoom to fit. You can also view this in equatorial coordinates or in ecliptic coordinates. You can do a couple of different kinds of searches. I'm going to do image contains target, and I'm going to put in a position that I know is in the region covered by the release data, and I'm going to go search to see what kind of images I can find. It turns out that the position that I entered is at the border of 3 different Euclid tiles. So each one of these rows is a different Euclid tile. This yellow crosshairs, or reticle, is the position that I asked for. This top row, all 4 of these are images from the Euclid spacecraft. The bottom 4 images are supporting ground-based data that the Euclid project has contributed to the archive. The data that's shown here is from this tile. If you want to see data from a different tile, you can click on the corresponding rows and the images update. Up here at the top, it tells you that it's giving me a 60 arcsecond cutout centered on the target. If you want to change the size of the cutout, you can click on this and it brings up a pop-up to show you the size of the cutout and whether you're centered on the search target center, the table row position, or a new position that you enter. Or you can get the full image, but don't do that cavalierly because the Euclid tiles are huge. If you close this and go to the Coverage tab, you can see just how big those tiles are. So here, those big rectangles are the regions covered by those 3 tiles. The reason this one is orange is because it corresponds to the selected row here. I can change which tile is selected by clicking in the image, or I can click in the table over here to select a different tile. The position that I asked for, though, is in here, in the region covered by all 3 tiles. We can also pull from the catalog. If you go to Inspect Objects, there's the position that I asked for. There's the position. I'm going to ask for 360 arcsecond search radius search. Now this search took a little bit longer because it found almost 14,000 sources. Here are all of the sources that it found. Now it's overlaid those sources on the coverage image as well, but because there are so many sources, it's shown the catalog in a hierarchical catalog format. If we zoom in, then those cells get smaller and smaller. It's telling us that there are 202 sources in that tile, and 230 sources in that tile, 49 sources in that tile. So if you click on the tiles, it'll render the numbers of sources in that tile until it decides that there are too many, and then it goes back to the cells. If you zoom in far enough, eventually it will show you all of the sources. Now, here's an interesting side effect of the fact that here we had 3 tiles, and that's the center of the tile. And here we asked for a catalog centered on my search position. If we go back to the Cutouts tab, so here it's centered on that first row. So you've got that little galaxy here, and that here. If we go over here, that's clearly a different part of the sky. It's because here, this is centered on the search target center. I could also pick table row position or user entered position. Over here, it's centered on the table row position, not the search target position. So it could be in a completely different part of the sky. If you go to the coverage map, you can see that the center of that tile is a very different part of the sky than the search target position. And even some of the sources in the catalog could be like all the way over here, which could be a fairly long distance from the search target position. So you have to be a little bit careful, and that's why the sky may appear to jump if you have cutouts over here on the right and you go back and forth in between images and objects. Of course, Euclid has more than just images and catalogs. It also has spectra. One of the columns in the objects catalog has spectrum. And if you click on one of the ones that has spectrum, and then you go to the spectrum tab, it loads the spectrum that it finds. It sometimes takes a little while because it has to open some truly huge files in order to find the spectrum for you. But it understands that this is a spectrum. It's giving you things in the right units. But if you just stab blindly, you probably won't find a spectrum. And even if you sort this list down to just be the things that have spectra, if you just stab blindly among this greatly reduced catalog, you probably won't find very interesting targets. So I'm going to stack the deck just slightly. I'm going to go over to search by ID, and I'm going to put in 3 IDs of things that I know have interesting spectra. That's another kind of search that you can do. You can put in either a tile ID or an object ID. I put in object IDs. So it's come back with 3 object IDs, and all of them have spectra. But again, it takes a little while for it to go and find the spectrum and render it for you. Okay, there's one of the spectra that it found. So in order for us to do anything really interesting with the spectrum, one of the first things that we have to do is pin it. The concept of pinning is pretty straightforward. It just means hold on to the spectrum, much like pinning it on a corkboard would. It doesn't mean save it to disk. It just means hold on to it in the tool for a little while so that I can do further manipulations with it. Because it does take so long to pull it out of the files, it makes a lot of sense to hold on to it for a little bit so that you can continue to work with it rather than reload it every time. Okay, so now we have all 3 of the spectra. I'm going to make the spectrum window big. So now we have 3 quasars loaded. What I'm going to do now is combine them. So it understands that they are spectra, and what I'm going to do is combine them onto the same spectrum. So I've got all 3 of them in 3 different colors combined here. I can make that one spectrum big, and you can see that they're at 3 very different redshifts. It also turns out in the individual plots, you can adjust for the redshift as well. You can also change the units because it understands that this is a spectrum. It has preloaded different kinds of units for both the wavelength and the flux axis. One of the other things that's important to know when working with Euclid catalogs is that the main catalog, the MER catalog, is the only one that has right ascension and declination. So when you do an inspect object search, it is in fact searching the MER catalog. But there are other catalogs that are super useful as well. So for example, you might want to get the PhotoZs for those 3 quasars. But if you go to the PhotoZ catalog, you see it doesn't have right ascension and declination. How are you supposed to search a catalog that doesn't have position? Well, you don't do a position search. You do an object ID search. You can load object IDs from a table, or you can enter the list of object IDs. So I have that list of object IDs from before, and I can match it against the object ID catalog here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and search. But while it's doing that, I'm going to go back over here and caution you that if you load object IDs from a table, you do have to be very careful because computers at the end of the day are excruciatingly stupid. The object ID here is a long, which means that if you have a list of object IDs that you're going to compare to this object ID, it has to also be longs. They can't be, say, strings, because the computer will say, well, one's a long and one's a string, therefore they're not the same. So you have to format it carefully if you're going to upload your own list of object IDs. Let's go back over to the results. Here we have the matches from that PhotoZ catalog based on object IDs. Now, it's hard when there's a whole bunch of columns. If you go for that row over to details, now you have a vertical view of all of the columns in that catalog. And especially if you're new to this catalog, I at least find it super useful to be able to read the description so that I can try to understand what all of these columns are. At the end of the day, what you want to do is actually read all the documentation that comes from Euclid so that you understand exactly what these parameters are. But this at least gets you up and moving so that you have a sense of what all of these columns are. That Details tab works for these other columns too. You can go to some of these catalogs. Those are the pinned spectra from before. If you go to the Object catalog, you get at least a sense of what all of these individual columns are, so you can get up and moving with these data, and then you can go read the documentation for the individual values once you're ready to start doing some more detailed analysis. In order to save things, you can save the plain table just by clicking on the diskette. You can save a plot just by clicking on the diskette. But to actually download the data, which you probably want to do, from the object table, for example, if you click on here, you'll select everything in the column, and then you click on Generate Download Script. You can then decide whether you want to get everything or just some of the things. Flatten file structure just describes whether or not you want things in a subdirectories or not, and then you can save it to your local disk or to something called the IRSA workspace. You can also do the image from the Images tab, select all, Generate Download Script, and again, do you want everything? Do you just want the main product, the cutouts? You can change the cutouts in the interface here and then go to the downloads. And again, flatten file structure just means, do you want individual subdirectories for each one of these tiles, or do you not want individual subdirectories? Clicking on this gives you a download script. You send it to the background. The job monitor here controls that packaging process, and it's going to generate a script. You can choose a script for wget, curl, or just a list of URLs that you can write your own wrapper for to download the data. If you get any of those, you can also choose to modify the script so that you're pulling from the copies, not necessarily here at IRSA, but the one that's in the cloud. You can also go and work with those URLs and your Python notebooks to interact with the data in the cloud. So click on this. You can see curl, wget, or just the list of URLs.